All righty, welcome back, gentle viewers, to Esoteric Beat. This is part two of a whole new project where I'm doing a book reading. We had the author interview over at part one. I'm not going to be the kind of tyrant that says you got to listen to part one before part two. So if you just stumbled across part two looking for a book reading, you want to start with the book reading and then listen to our edifying discussion, you can follow the link in the description. Or if you'd rather get the context first, pause this, go over to number one, check it out, and come on back and then listen to the reading. So Cliff Jones Jr., tell me the name of your work in progress and read it to me.
All right, it's from The Lasting Lands, and this is in book one of The Lasting Lands, chapter 9, kind of starting in the middle of the chapter, and I'm going to end also in the middle of the chapter. Just read a bit that kind of holds together. Yeah, and it connects up to what we were talking about before a bit with like the Alice in Wonderland stuff in your head. And anyway, so sure, Let's get right to it. All right. Her father looked back with pitying compassion. He was about to speak, but something caught his voice. His mouth hung agape for a few seconds and then tightened defiantly. Once again, his eyes closed. Spread across the long table, almost covering it now, the teacups and saucers began to rattle, at first quietly, and then with such violence that many of them cracked or fell to the floor. Some powerful energy had gripped the room, and Adelaide was terrified that she and her father would be destroyed by it. She began to search the walls for a door. There were none. Not even a window. Help, she screamed. Let me out. She scratched at the wall in despair. She kicked at it, but her boots were missing, and she only stubbed her toes. In an instant, the rattling ceased. She looked back to see the cups, the saucers, the chairs, the table itself, all floating into the air. Items bumped into each other here and there, but for the most part, the room was silent. Her father was gone. Now swimming around in a zero gravity pool of dishes, lamps, and books, Adelaide tried to scream, "Wake me up!" But the air refused to carry her voice. It sounded muffled, distorted. Over and over, she screamed in the desperate hope that someone somewhere might hear her. Then all at once, gravity returned to the room. Everything dropped promptly to the floor with an awful crash, including Adelaide herself. This fall left her with a nasty cut on her head, but given the state of the room, it could have been much worse. As Adelaide stared at the redness trickling down her arm, a most peculiar thing began to happen. The blood began streaming back up into the wound, leaving no trace behind. In another moment, the cut was closing itself up, as if it were being stitched with invisible thread. Her hand was soon in such a good, sorry, her hand was soon in such good shape that Adelaide had to question whether she might not have imagined the whole thing. She'd quite forgotten that she was in fact dreaming. The sight of blood can do that to a person. At this point, Adelaide noticed a large puddle in the corner of the room. A small patch of the wall was darkened with moisture, and the discoloration seemed to be spreading ever so slowly. Adelaide pushed at the spot and was surprised to find it give, as if she were pressing into damp earth. She began to dig at it with her fingers, and sure enough, soggy clumps of the wall came away with each scrape. The more she dug, the wetter the wall became, and the easier it was to dig still farther. Soon the spot produced a steady trickle of water. Then, as more bits of the wall were washed away, it transformed itself into a gushing torrent, which Adelaide feared would fill the whole room before long. Normally, she would rely on Ada's judgment in such a dangerous situation, but Ada was nowhere to be found. As the murky water reached her waist, Adelaide resolved to push through the wall and try to swim to the surface of whatever this was. At least now, there still remained plenty of air to fill her lungs. In another few seconds, that could change. Holding her breath, Adelaide used her heel to give the wall a solid kick just below the breach. Water rushed in with such relentless fury that she had to grasp at the edge of the hole to keep herself from being pushed back to the other end of the room. Under the water, she pulled herself through the hole and started frantically kicking and grasping for the unseen surface. After around 20 seconds of steady swimming, Adelaide began to panic. What if I'm too deep to reach the surface? Or what if I'm in an underwater cave and I'm about to run into the ceiling without ever finding air? These were real possibilities. Adelaide had no idea where she was. She just knew that air usually sat atop water, and she was currently immersed in the latter. There was only one thing to be done, so she had to commit herself to it fully. Ignoring the silent screams of her weary muscles, she kicked her feet and swam harder than ever. Just when Adelaide was about to lose hope, the water began to lighten rapidly, growing almost pink. Then she burst through the surface of the water with such force that she nearly left it entirely. Thanks to gravity now working against her instead of to her benefit, she found herself submerged again before she'd had enough time to properly fill her lungs. Still, there it was, air. In her haste to take in as much of it as possible, she also gulped down no small amount of briny seawater. It tasted like a lukewarm cup of tea if a tin of salted anchovies had been added to the pot. Finally, forcing open her eyes to the sting of salt, Adelaide took a look around. There was no sun visible in the sky, but the whole thing glowed a radiant pink from horizon to horizon. Across the surface of the water, there was nothing but gently lapping waves in all directions. No land in sight, no hope of rescue. Her mother was an old woman. Her father was psychotic, and now, after all she'd been through, she was going to die in this endless ocean without even Ada to comfort her. Now that the immediate danger was past and only impending doom remained, Adelaide allowed herself to have a proper cry. So that's the bit.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm definitely resonating a lot with our discussion about sort of writing that is about altered states, writing that describes altered states, and then also writing that kind of either reminds you of or triggers or plays with these altered states. Did you have another bit that you want to read?
I mean, I could keep, well, that was all I really planned on. I could read some more,
Yeah, we
but
got more. Let's not leave the readers are hungry for more.
all
The
right, all right.
listeners, the
Yeah,
viewers.
I will point out though that of course, the whole book's not just like a bunch of disjointed dream states, but yeah, there is some of that, and I like that kind of stuff. So, so she got to the surface of the water. She's allowed herself to have a proper cry. Now, Cher, it's not that bad. The voice was unmistakable. Adelaide turned to see her dear Nanny not 5 feet away. Where there had been only water a moment ago, now rested a plump elderly woman in an ornate bathing gown. She floated so high on the water that she scarcely appeared to be touching it at all. It was as if the water were her bed and she simply lay down on it, her hands behind her head as a pillow. How are you doing that? Adelaide gasped, struggling to keep her head above water. Are you floating on something? Au contraire, she replied. I have sunk down to the bottom of the sky. You're the one who is floating. Climb up here and take a rest. You've earned it. Climb up onto the water? Adelaide puzzled over this. But I'm already in the water. Nanny sat up and grinned. Not even her hair was wet. You have seen an insect walking on the water before, no? This ocean is so large, so vast, that we are like insects to it. We are minuscule. She held her fingers close together on this last word. So keep this in mind. Adelaide tried in vain to grab hold of the surface of the water and pull herself up, but she only succeeded in splashing her grandmother and looking quite foolish. Then she imagined an insect with its tiny legs like strands of hair. That's me, she thought. She stretched out her fingers and placed her fingertips gently on the surface of the water. The surface tension provided subtle resistance, and the weight of her own body began to feel like nothing compared to the unfathomable density of the water. Slowly, carefully, she pulled herself up and sat beside Nanny, bobbing up and down with each passing ripple. That's right, Cher, the old woman whispered tenderly. It is nice here, no? Uh, Nothing changes up here. Not like where you live, eh? She pointed down at the water and motioned chaotically with her hands, her tongue protruding slightly. This water, it is life itself, the true eau de vie. We cannot live, we cannot leave the water entirely, not while we live. But we are not fishes. We swim in the water of instinct, but we breathe the air of intellect. We are surface creatures. Sometimes we leave for a while to visit the sky, but we always come back one way or another. The two sat in silence for a while, rising and falling with the gentle waves, absorbing the comforting warmth of the sea. It appeared as if an enormous looking glass had been made to cover the surface of the deep. As the sky above shone brightly down, so reflected the water below, though imperfectly, darkly. When Adelaide's excitement had fully settled, she laid her head in her grandmother's lap and related her strange experiences in Asgard thus far. It didn't seem to Adelaide that she'd ever be returning to Asgard, or to Earth for that matter. The Sea of Life was her home, and she could remember that now, as clearly as if she'd never forgotten. After a time, Nanny said in a tone of serene resignation, I suppose you must head back now. You will return to the sea soon enough, but for now you're needed back on land. But I don't want to go, Adelaide replied in stunned horror. No need to rush this, child, said Nanny knowingly. You will be back at your own time. Adelaide tried to object, but was distracted by the slithering of thin, delicate vines emerging from the water and winding around her fingers. She pulled away in fear, but larger and larger vines shot up from the water, catching her arms and legs and completely obscuring Nanny from her view. Soon the ocean became a writhing mass of green, rising ever higher into the air as the tangled vines grew. In another moment, Adelaide was released from their grip, and the foliage began to appear more geometrical and uniform. The vines under her feet flattened into an even platform so tightly knit that it might have been a slab of concrete. Even its color began to fade into a dull gray. Similarly, solid walls formed at right angles around her. Before her eyes, thin vines of a darker shade twisted and grew into tall, even pillars around the thickness of broom handles. The growth all around her became increasingly difficult to distinguish until all at once Adelaide found herself in a jail cell looking through black iron bars. So there's some PKD stuff in there, huh? You're on mute again.
We end with the Black Iron Prison.
Yeah.
Um, so this is a great start. I am hoping that you'll give us another bit, and I'm gonna kind of surprise you with what I want you to read first.
Oh
But
boy.
let's talk about. I got a couple of notes here. Um, let's talk process.
All right.
I want to hear how you feel about where you're at in this work in progress and how coming on this show might be part of your process, right? Having read that, how did you feel about it? Did you discover anything about the writing? What did you just learn about your own writing from reading it to us?
I mean, I don't know. I wrote that a long time ago. I wrote that like 10 years ago. I've been over it a lot. So I don't know. I was pretty familiar with it, you know?
So you feel like
Um,
that part's pretty finished.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole book I think is finished. It's just a matter of seeing if a publisher will agree to
So
that.
the work that we're talking about when we're talking about work in progress, it's not the like creative like figuring out what I want to write, but it's like the marketing, promotion, landing it kind of like
Basically, yeah.
that's all part of the creative process
Yeah,
too.
because I've been tinkering for a long time. You know what I mean? I've been working on it for a long time, so I've been polishing and stuff, you know.
So I'm also interested in we just had a, little 10-minute break. I went and fed my dogs, kind of reset my brain. Looking back on the interview that we gave where we kind of talked a little bit, I mean, we kind of talked a lot of sort of theory, right?
Mhm.
Do you feel like you learned anything about what you're trying to do? Any new ideas about Dream Punk coming up, or do you feel like you've got that? Is that pretty much set in stone? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm gonna keep, writing different things and moving along and doing different things. I feel like, you know, the first thing that I got out that was the first solo work here was something you'd call science fiction, basically. That's the main thing. And then the lasting lands, that's going to be basically fantasy. The next thing I want to do, I've been feeling like for a little bit, is something that would you would basically call horror, you know. And so I want to lean into that a little bit more. But certainly there's definitely horror elements in Drek and in the Lasting Lands as well, you know. But I don't know. I like that kind of stuff where it's supernatural and weird and psychological, you know.
So we're still trying to get our foot in the door, even though we have these lofty ambitions, trying to get a foot in the door of SFF horror kind of genre fiction. Um,
I mean, yeah, I don't have any kind of agent that's telling me, hey, you should focus more on this or that, so I'm just personally trying different things, you know.
so I'm interested in first lines. Could you give us just the first line of the book?
Okay, well,
Might take you a moment to navigate.
there is a prologue. There's a short prologue. Should I read that?
Yeah, give me the first sentence of the prologue.
All right, all right. This is a, this is a heavily influenced by, classic older kind of stuff like The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland. So the first line is, "Once upon a time, the sun was hot."
Love it. Love it. Okay, now what's the first line of like after the prologue? Like, what's the first line of chapter one when the story gets started in
Okay,
earnest?
all right. Um, by all accounts, Adelaide Batiste was a curious little girl.
Okay. Okay, that definitely establishes a trait of the character. Now, is there another part that you would like to read that maybe you have questions about, or that maybe you think is maybe not the strongest part of the work?
Oh man, calling me out on this. I don't have that just at the top of my head, because if I had it at the top of my head bothering me, I probably would have written it or
You would
rewritten
have
it by now.
already edited it.
Yeah. The thing is, there's a lot of tensions with, like, if I feel uncomfortable about something, it's probably not just like, well, throw that out and do it and do a different thing. It's more like, well, I need that for some reason. So I have to keep working at it and playing with it until it does what I want it to. So like, yeah, anyway, because yeah, this first chapter, I do sort of have to, like, very briefly, I had to make myself be as brief as possible, introducing a few characters, sort of like setting a little bit of a stage, because the characters are not just there in the first scene. Like Adelaide's father, he's a major character, and I wanted to introduce him right away, but he's not there. Um, so anyway, so there's definitely some telling up front rather than dropping you right into a fast-paced story, which for me, I feel like it depends on the type of story, whether you're gonna have a little bit of a slower, easing into it versus dropping somebody into the action. And this particular kind of story, I feel like is more like the traditional, almost like fairy tale type format. So it's not just like you're dropped in like we were in the reading.
So we start with Once Upon a Time. We start with these conventional hooks that you can easily wrap your mind around, and then we lull you into a false security and deliver the weird stuff. How
Well,
about the setting? Can you give me a reading that helps establish the setting of where this is all taking place?
okay. The prologue, it's very short, but it seems kind of disconnected from the beginning. So because the prologue's talking in terms of like Mars and Earth and just what's happening in space, basically. So that's a little different. Maybe I could read that because it's kind of
Sure.
short,
Yeah, do it.
and then okay, because then the chapter one, then all of a sudden you're in uh, uh in London, actually. So but yeah, so the prologue is, once upon a time the sun was hot. The sun was hot. It was so hot, in fact, that the planet Earth was just a ball of molten rock suspended in a cloud of noxious vapors. Mars, on the other hand, was doing fine. It had a rich atmosphere back then: oceans, rivers, trees, a wide variety of animal life, even people. All things considered, the people of Mars didn't look so very different from you or me. There was some variation in height, hair coverage, head shape, and the like, but what are such piddling distinctions among neighbors? As the millennia wore on, much of the sun's heat dissipated into the endless vacuum of space. It still had plenty of heat to spare, but only for its nearest children. The change on Mars was so gradual that hardly anyone even noticed. Life went on as it always does, adapting to conditions as they arose. The vast northern ocean began to recede as more and more of the planet's water found its way to the poles, settling into those sprawling reservoirs of ice. Eventually, a comfortable place to live could only be found in the tropical regions near the equator, and even there it was a bit chilly for comfort. The people of Mars had to construct massive greenhouses to protect their crops from the increasingly frigid winds. It soon became common for more affluent families to take up permanent residence in these structures, a luxury unavailable to the impoverished masses. As conditions worsened, whole nations starved to death or froze in their sleep. Only a single domed oasis yet survived on the surface of Mars, and all the while Earth was coming into bloom. So So it's kind of dark, but basically the style and the story and everything, it's sort of like a children's book, but yeah, it's pretty dark and um
So that was the zoomed out setting,
yeah.
and I thought that that was perfect. So before I ask you to zoom in and show me something about the like, present state of the action, let's talk a little bit about Mars. Um, what are the precedents? I mean, Mars is such a great topic in uh oh shoot, I'm getting a call. Can we pause a sec?
All right.
So we were talking about Mars. Sorry, I had to take a work call, or what I thought was a work call. Um, so Mars has a lot of precedent in sci-fi. Tell me about what do you love about Mars in science fiction?
I mean, honestly, when I was looking for somewhere to set this, I wanted to make like an Oz type place, that would make sense. And I thought about like an inner Earth type thing. And I thought about even the moon, and I thought about different things. It's just that for different reasons, those other ones wouldn't make sense, and Mars just was pliable. It was something that I could make sense of. So like basically, if there's a big crater on Mars and it's domed and it's like a greenhouse, then you can have something that's kind of Earth-like, even if the gravity is kind of different. And so I wasn't really thinking about different sci-fi as much. I was thinking about just like what could practically be plausible in a way, even if it is really magical and fudged. Because yeah, there's actual magic in this stuff, but there's a lot of it that's sort of with the veneer of science fiction.
So you're not so much situating yourself in stories about Mars, but just trying to do your own thing with it.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, let's zoom in then, and can you read a description of what's going on at Mars in the now of the story?
Well, we don't get back to Mars until the next chapter, I guess, because it's sort of like stuff's happening in yeah, so what's going on is Adelaide's father is missing, and her mother is, they're living in a, kind of a shitty place in Whitechapel in London. And her mother needs to work more and is not able to take care of her. And so her grandmother takes Adelaide away to Abergwili in Wales, where that's like where the mom grew up, and that's their ancestral home kind of. And so she's first wished away to Wales, and then from there goes to Mars, and like in a so I don't know, where do we want to it's a real gradual transition is what I'm saying. Because even from there, she goes to Mars, and then she's in a cave to start with. And yeah. And the thing is, it doesn't the story itself, it doesn't even tell you that it's Mars. So I'm kind of giving you all kind of info.
Oh,
I mean
well,
the
let's
the
let's
the
avoid
pro
spoilers.
I mean, the prologue straight up talks about Mars, and it says, all this stuff was happening on Mars. Meanwhile, Earth was just starting to come into bloom, and so life's developing on Mars, and it just kind of leaves it there as like and so that's why I think, that's a good job for a prologue to do, is to get you thinking about stuff that you're not quite there. You're not quite there yet, but you have the idea this is where it's going. Um, but it does seem disconnected, but eventually, you get there. This is one of those where you know, have a little, it takes some time. That's why it's a full length novel instead of a shorter thing like Drek.
You want to
Um,
tell me and while we're having this conversation, you can be thinking about what you might want to read next. Tell me about your next steps in terms of where are you at in terms of landing a home for this thing, and what's your elevator pitch?
oh boy. I didn't know I was doing the business end of things here. Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure. I mean, the thing is, I've published three things so far with Fractured Mirror Publishing, and so I haven't pitched it to them yet. They, I feel like they liked my other things. They probably would like this too, but I don't just want to limit myself is all, so I'm kind of want to look around and maybe want to even find an agent possibly, um, you know, uh, that sort of thing, because I've been building sort of groundwork for this novel, basically. So it's like, yeah, I got the 3 books out. They're sort of laying groundwork as establishing dream punk and everything. And now I'm doing a novel in that space. That's the idea. But as far as I don't know, elevator pitch, to me, I feel like what I came up with, it's sort of like it reminds me of like the more thoughtful episodes of Adventure Time. Have you ever watched Adventure Time? Yeah, it's and a lot of stuff happens on Mars there too. Some of that happens, I guess, but Mars is a dead planet there. But basically the logic with Adventure Time is, yeah, it's a sci-fi type logic really, but there's all kind of crazy stuff. It feels more like, there's magic, there's weird fantasy stuff, but the more you learn about the world of Adventure Time, the more sci-fi it feels. Like there were the great mushroom wars that made everything go crazy way back when, and it's like, well, it's atomic stuff, it's mushroom clouds. And so it sounds more fantastical than it really turns out to be. And I feel like I got a lot of that going in The Lasting Lands. And yeah, my original title for the first part, and the original title I had going was Adelaide and Osgard. And Osgard is obviously, connected to Asgard, but also to Oz. And that's a word that basically means the lasting lands. I mean, the English translation of is the lasting lands. And that comes from a sort of a constructed language that I based on ancient Hebrew roots, because I'm in linguistics is my background, and I've gotten really, obsessively into ancient Hebrew, and especially ancient Hebrew phonology, like the really old pronunciation, and how and I love pronunciation, how you can shift pronunciation around and systematically. And so I have 4 dialects of this old language. I mean, that's a constructed language, but it's based on real human language. So anyway, uh, yeah, so there's some sort of Tolkien-esque kind of bits of made up language in this too. Um, but not a whole lot, not gratuitous, because I don't want to lose people, but I use it mostly for the names of things, because I wanted all the names to make sense.
So you're
And I
not
wanted
trying to get people like downloading Duolingo to learn your constructed language.
no, because I mean the thing is, there actually is a constructed language that I barely even feature in it, but it's a little bit toward the end of the book. There's one that I've been working on really, like, a lot, that I would love for people to learn eventually. That'd be great. But the main constructed language that has the 4 dialects, that's just for the story, basically. That's just for this world. The other one was like, yeah, I wanna work on that one. The other one's like romance based, so it's more useful for people if they're actually going to use it. But but yeah, that's just like a really nerdy specific passion of mine that's can tie into the fiction, but sideways thing. But
That's super cool, and we do share an interest in ancient Hebrew. I remember I in grad school I got as far as like printing up some article on Sagalization. It might have been by Chomsky's dad or something.
mm,
Anyway, I ended up dropping off on my ancient Hebrew studies, but fascinating stuff, right? And
yeah, yeah,
I guess the modern language is spoken today is actually kind of a constructed language, right? Where they
yeah,
had to
yeah,
like borrow stuff from other languages in
yeah,
order to like make it work, because we don't have extant in the like ancient texts enough to actually reconstruct everything about the ancient language, right?
yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, for me, it's like I used Hebrew because, I grew up in a Judeo-Christian tradition, and Hebrew is like, it was just sort of taken for granted that that's the original language. And it's like, so this whole story, it's not a scientifically accurate kind of thing. You know what I mean? So if I'm sort of positing, um, Proto-Hebrew as like the original human language that came from Mars, you know, that's not that's just fiction. You know what I mean? That's fantasy. And the thing is, it works within the story because you know, all of this is, it's all dream punk, it's all just, it is what it is. By the time you get to the end of the story, you'll see what I'm doing, Um, but yeah, what I'm more interested in than Hebrew specifically is the it's going to sound super nerdy, but I'm into the sound shifts. I'm into the sound systems and how you can,
Mm,
translate from one to another. Like for example, the word Osgard, it consists, it looks all like Germanic, I guess. It's got like Ghard, guard, so it's like Osgard, but that particular word in a different dialect in Osgard, a different dialect, it would be Anzayenda. And so it's like some people, the Bigfoot looking people over on the west would say Osgard, and then the Munchkin looking people on the east would say Anzayenda. And it's the same word, but it's written the same way, kind of like modern Chinese uses the same writing system for essentially different languages. They just share a writing system, so they're mutually intelligible in writing, but not in speaking necessarily. So that's sort of like how the dialects are in this. But that's all really academic kind of stuff. That's not important that much for the story, but I like it. It's the world building part.
yeah, no, I mean, and like this stuff has been fun to play with and has been essential to fantasy since at least since Tolkien, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and like you could write textbooks on this language and that language and the history of this and that, but that's not necessarily what people are mostly going to read. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm
so
not I'm not trying to write that.
we got 7 minutes left on our recording. Do you want to do one more passage?
Oh my gosh. I only picked out one passage. Let me see. Let me see. Um, hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe we kind of hard on the spot. I should have picked out multiple passages, I guess, because I don't want to give away stuff necessarily.
Yeah, or if you've got a bit that could illustrate what you're saying about language.
Um, shoot, yeah, I don't know.
I tell you what, I'll pause in a moment so you can one. Okay, so we just paused and went down a little rabbit hole, and I'm putting Cliff on the spot here, but I think we found another good passage.
All right. Well, it's something. It's something. So basically, yeah. Adelaide, I haven't spelled this out at all. So it's Adelaide, and then she has a voice in her head that she calls Ada. And I only have a few minutes, so let's just read this. All right. Just then, Ada noticed a flicker of light, which she was fairly certain hadn't been there a moment ago. It began to bounce around wildly, growing gradually larger as it went. Allo? Called a small, husky voice. Then, with more certainty, Cecily allo? Afmong. Adelaide recognized the strangely accented hello, but the rest was gibberish, or perhaps French. It did sound a bit like when Nanny and Pierre thought no one else was listening, or when they were attempting to talk over her head. As Adelaide puzzled over this speech, the light she now recognized flame came rushing toward her so quickly that she jumped to her feet. As it approached, she heard the voice again, now more excited. Yomba, lip, go away. Excuse me, said Ada. She'd interpreted this last word as a command to go away. Emboldened by indignation, she added, I have as much right to be here as you, I reckon. Who are you, anyhow? At this, the bearer of the flame leaned in closer, allowing the candlelight to reveal its face. It was the same white rabbit she'd been following moments ago. It seemed more like years, and it was talking. It furrowed its brow and began. Je ne comprends her lack of at least knew how to say this much. I go a little bit more, I guess. I don't know. All right, all right. The rabbit looked uneasy, and as far as its face could display such an emotion, impatient. Lu, come hilla, it said with some effort, standing on its hind legs and beckoning her to approach. Despite resistance from Ada, Adelaide felt compelled to comply. Again, she felt sleepy, but this time she didn't let it overtake her. In a moment, the rabbit no longer seemed an unfamiliar stranger, but a friend, her good friend Tyrrell. Adelaide felt she knew this rabbit quite well, though he'd only introduced himself a moment earlier. She could still recall his words. I, Tyrrell, come ye from Earth? As Tyrrell released his grip, fear crept back into Adelaide's mind, but she felt compelled to answer the question. Khan, mon Mirkard, she replied, surprised at her sudden fluency. I, from Earth. Vathris Valo, Tyrrell said under his breath. Ada half understood this as something like Lord God, though the pronunciation seemed rather off. Listen, Tyrrell continued in what she now knew to be the Goe language of Asgard. None of this real. You hit your head when you fell down in Midden, and right now you just dreaming. Rabbits can't talk, you can. Of course I can that, replied Adelaide, matching the rabbit's speech. I just imagine ye, so you can't tell nothing what I don't already ken. Right, returned Tyrrell, much relieved that the child turned out to be so easy to convince. His third countenance now relaxed a little, but only a little. All right.
Well,
That was,
Cliff, I gotta say, you've just pulled a rabbit out of a hat there, because that was awesome, and I feel like
thanks.
that definitely spoke to a lot of the concerns we've been discussing, and I think we'll leave our readers with a taste that has got them hungry for more. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing where you go with this, and thanks so much for coming on my inaugural Esoteric Beat book reading. We look forward to talking with you maybe more in the future once you've got the book to brag about in your hot little hands.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right.
Have yourself a great day, my friend.
You too. All right.